Hi everyone, my name is Georgie Burris. I'm a research assistant for the Cape Luther Institute, and this semester I've had the pleasure advising these wonderful students.
Good afternoon, morning everyone. We are the Spring 2016 Bonefish research team, and we characterize a pre-spawning aggregation of bonefish. I am Quentin Anderson.
I'm Toby Ketchum. I'm Rob Titsworth. I'm Andrew Muja.
I'm Cece O'Mara. I'm Lily Rommel. I'm Josie Cummings.
A spawning aggregation is a temporary gathering of a specific marine species that gathers at a predictable time and place to spawn. Anything from small reef fish to large humpback whales migrate to their spatially distinct spawning locations from a few meters to thousands of kilometers. Unfortunately, these large aggregations create an extreme increase in biomass at the aggregation site, attracting both egg predators and adult predators, like these sharks feeding on the grouper. These aggregations also result in an illusion of plenty, which for the fishermen is good because they can just go fish, but that also results in extreme overfishing and depletion of the population of fish. Bonefish leave their shallow flats and migrate distances up to 100 kilometers to their spatially distinct locations during the day, and in the evening the fish begin porpoising. We use porpoising as a metric for spawning because they come to the surface and they start to gulp air. Porpoising is used to gulp air, and it is thought to help control buoyancy when moving to deeper reef environments and then moving over the drop-offs to spawn. It is also thought to help expel their eggs. Economically, bonefish are a very important species to the Bahamas, generating $141 million in revenue each year in the catch and release fishery. And ecologically, bonefish are very important because their feeding behavior helps to reintroduce important nutrients into the water column.
Despite their importance, bonefish are a data-deficient species in the Bahamas. It is unknown where bonefish spawn, or if spawning aggregations act as a key for predators to feed. Prior to this study, bonefish were observed forming spawning aggregations during the Newton full moons, most likely due to the stronger tidal ranges during these times. Other species have also been observed spawning during these times, most likely due to the extremes of light and darkness that act as a key for them to spawn. Bonefish spawn at the drop-off because they have pelagic larvae, and the strong going tides will pull the eggs out over deep water, reducing the risk of predation from egg predators. Currently, there are 6 known bonefish pre-spawning aggregation sites in the Bahamas. As you can see here, all these sites are close to deep water, so the bonefish can go out and spawn. Of these 6, in 2011, No Name Harbor was discovered to be a bonefish pre-spawning aggregation location. No Name Harbor is very close to our campus here at the Island School campus right there, so it's very easy for us to go over and do research. The purpose of our study is to characterize No Name Harbor as a bonefish pre-spawning aggregation location by creating a bathymetric map, assessing the influence of abiotic factors such as moon phase and tide on the aggregation, and determine predator abundance in interaction with the aggregation. This research will allow bonefish to be better managed and protected, which could lead to the establishment of a marine protected area around No Name Harbor. The characterization of this pre-spawning aggregation of bonefish could lead to the discovery of new pre-spawning aggregation sites in the Bahamas. By observing the abiotic factors that act as a key for bonefish to spawn, bonefish reproductive cycles, and the fishery of bonefish as a whole can be better understood.
To characterize No Name Harbor, we created a bathymetric map of the site. This was created taking specific GPS waypoints that correspond with different depth measurements throughout the harbor. We also conducted visual surveys and video surveillance to determine the size of the aggregation and the predator abundance. Visual surveys were conducted by laying face down on a paddleboard and looking into the aggregation. Video surveillance was conducted by placing a GoPro camera into the harbor for 90 minutes at a time at incoming tide for best visibility. Porpoising behavior was used as a metric for this study because we could not directly observe the aggregation due to difficult diving conditions.
To assess predator-prey abundance, acoustic telemetry is used. Acoustic telemetry is a method used to track movements of species implanted with transmitters. A Vemco VR2W was placed in No Name Harbor, which is an acoustic receiver that detects signals from the V13 transmitter in predators. To catch these predators, high-speed trolling was used. This resulted in 7 barracuda caught in this upper location, which did not overlap with the known bonefish spawning aggregation. There were also 7 barracuda caught in this near location, which did overlap with the known bonefish spawning aggregation. These areas were chosen to determine if predators were being attracted from a far distance or at home ranges which overlap with the aggregation. To assess predator interactions of a barracuda, an acoustic transmitter was surgically implanted into the body cavity. During the surgery, the barracuda was temporarily anesthetized using clove oil. Once the surgery was complete, the barracuda was placed in a recovery pen alongside the boat for at least 45 minutes for full recovery before release at its capture site.
This is a bathymetric depth map that we created using a program called QGIS. It has depths ranging from 0 to 12 meters, and tidal differences were controlled by calculating the depth at slack low tide. As you can see here, the darker areas show deeper water and the lighter areas show shallower water, and on the right is an aerial shot of No Name Harbor. All of our data was non-parametric, therefore we took non-parametric t-tests to show data significance. Here shows the size of the aggregation over time, where on the x-axis, the circles represent moon phase, and along the y-axis, it shows a range of 0 to 600 fish, representing the aggregation size. Along the top, the fish symbol represents porpoising on the days of our survey. Our data showed that the aggregation size did not vary significantly with tide, moon phase, or the observation of porpoising. Here shows the probability of porpoising during each moon phase, shown on the x-axis, the first quarter moon, the full moon, the last quarter moon, and the new moon, and along the y-axis shows the probability of porpoising. Our data showed that the probability of porpoising was significantly greater during the first quarter moon than any other 3 moon phases. Here shows the average residence index of barracuda as seen on the y-axis during the months of March and April. We calculated this by dividing the amount of days the predator was in No Name Harbor by the amount of days in that month. Our data showed that the predator abundance did not vary significantly between these 2 months. This last figure shows the predator abundance on the y-axis over time on the x-axis. We saw that the data told us that the aggregation size did not vary significantly with the predator abundance, but there was an average of 2 predators each time we went back and visited No Name Harbor.
This study aimed to characterize No Name Harbor by determining predator abundance and to assess the influences of abiotic factors on bonefish pre-spawning behavior. According to previous studies, the whole aggregation was believed to stay in No Name Harbor for 4 to 7 days, leave, and return throughout the spawning season. While individual fish might be moving back and forth between No Name Harbor and their foraging ground, this study shows that as a whole, the aggregation is remaining in No Name Harbor throughout the bonefish spawning season. The probability of porpoising occurring during the first quarter moon is significant compared to the other moons, suggesting that this is the time when bonefish are spawning, which contradicts what previous studies have said. This is an atypical cue to follow because, as you can see, the first quarter moon is not as distinguishable as the new or the full moon. Commonly, other spawning species, like the snapper pictured here, use the peaks in the lunar cycle as their spawning cue. The results from this study suggest that aggregation size and tide are not cues for bonefish spawning. Therefore, there are most likely other cues that the bonefish are following. Future studies can look at other potential spawning cues, like the sex ratio in an aggregation, which is quantified by size because typically male bonefish are smaller than females, or a combination of previously studied cues. Further, this data suggests that bonefish predators, including grouper, barracuda, and sharks, include No Name Harbor in their home range and are interacting with the aggregation, which has been observed anecdotally. The receiver in No Name Harbor only collects data from inside the harbor itself and during the daytime, because at night, the aggregation and the predators that follow it leave the harbor to move offshore to the areas that bonefish spawn. Therefore, the predators, including the 7 undetected barracuda caught in the far range, can still be interacting with the aggregation, but at night and offshore. It has been observed via night tracking that one of the tagged barracuda was following the aggregation for over 6 hours. Here, the yellow line signifies the movement of the aggregation, and the data points show where the barracuda was detected. This image clearly shows that predators are interacting with and following the aggregation.
Therefore, it is important that the data from the offshore receivers is collected and that the predator abundance in No Name Harbor is studied for a more extended period of time so that we can understand better the dependence of coastal predators on the bonefish spawning aggregation. In addition, future studies can track bonefish individually and as an aggregation to understand how and why they are gathering in No Name Harbor. Now that No Name Harbor has been characterized as one of the 6 known pre-spawning aggregation sites in the Bahamas, it can be hopefully protected and other sites can be identified. This study and future research are important because being able to predict the timing of spawning is critical to a species' success, and potential marine protected areas and closed seasons can be established. Even though bonefish specifically are a catch and release fishery, it has been observed that they experience a high post-release predation rate. And as No Name Harbor is a pre-spawning aggregation site, there is this illusion of plenty that can attract fishermen potentially. And as there is also a high predator abundance in No Name Harbor, this creates a risk for the species. So, being able to protect bonefish spawning aggregations is critical not only to the species, but to the recreational fishery and the ecological stability. We would like to thank our lovely research advisor, Georgie Burris, Dr. Erin Schultz for help with project design and fieldwork, Holly Baresh, the Flats intern, for all her help, the Fisheries Conservation Foundation, the Hutchins Family Foundation, and the University of Illinois for all their project support. This is our literature cited. Thank you, and do you have any questions?
Was there any research done or data observed on just the total number of bonefish versus prior year classes and everything?
The question was there any difference in the size of aggregation versus previous years? So this is the first year, I think, that we are studying the pre-spawning aggregation site in the Bahamas. So this is all the data that we've collected so far.
How many bonefish do you typically see in an aggregation?
But the question was, how many bonefish do we typically see in an aggregation? Now, this number varies from aggregation to aggregation. Like there's an aggregation out in Andros that is much larger than our aggregation, but the one we see here usually has around 350 fish.
Are there any conclusions to be drawn between phases of the moon and bonefish fishing success?
Don't answer.
Well, the question was, are there any correlations to be made for fishing success and moon phase? Well, I'm going to have to respond with, please do not fish the aggregation, for they experience a high post-release mortality rate, and we would not like to see that among our aggregation here.
Well, is the aggregation influenced then by the moon phase? You guys implied that it was with your statistical significance.
The question was asking if moon phase does influence the aggregation, and we found that the probability of porpoising occurring was more significant in the first quarter moon, and porpoising is our metric for spawning. So when we see porpoising, we assume that the bonefish are going off to spawn that night. So from the statistical analysis, we found that bonefish are most likely spawning during the first quarter moon.